But there is something interesting happening, which I think is something to be aware of and is problematic, which is the art, fashion and luxury nexus, which you can see here. This is quite interesting. In Paris I saw this alternative program which said, "In brands we trust," which is basically being against everything being branded. But you understand that this is all about shopping, and how do you make buying shoes more interesting than just buying shoes, because buying shoes is actually rather boring. So Louis Vuitton, as an example, and I could give many examples, uses here Yo-Yo Kusama as a way of heightening and enriching the experience. I saw this also in Taipei, this is London, and so on. The same happens when you go into a Prada shop, Tiffany, and you can even see Salvatore Ferragamo, who made the shoes for Marilyn Monroe, in Florence, has a museum where it shows stories of Marilyn Monroe and filmmaking and so on. So even the fashion brands like Ferragamo or Gucci are getting into museums and creating museums. So if you go to Florence, you'll see all sorts of museums that have nothing to do with art. They have to do with shoes and clothes and so on. Now, it's not necessarily bad, but it's just useful to note that this is happening. Now, the other thing that is useful to note, that everything becomes so branded it becomes the same. Now, you know there's Soho in London, which exists, it's a place, south of somewhere. Soho in New York, south of Houston Street. So everything, though, is now being called Soho. Soho Coffee, Soho Bar, Beijing, Soho Galaxy, because we have to have the Galaxy, Soho Galaxy. So in a way, even that was unique, because Soho in London was the artistic quarter of London, has just become a name that everybody uses. I recently saw a noodle shop called Soho. Anyway, and that was in Latvia, and Latvia is the tiny state in Eastern Europe. So now I want to talk about two more things. One, I was asked to talk about heritage and creativity, and I believe these connect very well. Now, one of the problems, this is the Soho Galaxy in Beijing, is this icon mania. And from a cultural perspective, quite often, the fact that we're creating containers rather than contents in containers, that we're putting so much emphasis on the building and have no budget or little budget left to pay for the resources. And it's quite interesting that this regeneration that happens through icons has become quite a battleground. This is the Renaissance Hotel in Zurich, yeah? Renaissance, and here an artist has put in the same writing, resistance. And very interesting, because I'll show you what's happening around this building in a minute, yeah? So, one of the dangers of course, heritage is that you turn it into a museum and it's just not living. But here is an example, Helsinki, design capital of the world last year. This is the Nokia factory that through the new creative economy has 800 people employed here, which is more people than used to be employed when it was a major factory. So it's quite interesting that this new economy generates quite a lot of people. Now here's something quite interesting. This is a textile museum in Tilburg in the Netherlands, which I thought sounded rather boring. And then I spoke to the director, who said, I've never had anything to do with museums in my life. I'm an anthropologist, and I'm going to recreate this museum in a way that's relevant to the 21st century. So what he did is he created a factory for the generation and creation of new textiles and materials. And at the end of this old factory, is a showroom of new textiles. So in a sense, the museum, rather than purely being about the past, is also about the future. Here's another one of these examples in Rotterdam, the Creative Factory, where the city has given individuals vouchers that they can freely use, for example, by having space wherever they choose. But this is a very interesting way of using vouchers for incubation. So a city gives you a voucher, You as an artist or a young company can choose where you want to use this. Many people, in fact, use it here, and this is office space, which is a typical co-working space. There's one company, there's another company, there's another company, there's another company, all in one open space. And this is another part of this same place. Here's another one in another city in the Netherlands, Maastricht, where equally here, this is one company, this is another company, over there is a third company. So the spaces look very untraditional. Here's another example. I'm just using the Netherlands because I happen to be on the advisory board of all of these buildings. So here is the fashion quarter in Arnhem, where the city happened to own these buildings. The university is 1 kilometre here, so the city gives people coming out of college a shop and a workshop. So this street has suddenly become rather a famous fashion street, because everybody, which is quite difficult, has actually a shop to not only show their wares, but also in the back to produce them. So very interesting use of public facilities. This has in turn attracted the music industry to the district, so you can see that one catalytic example leads to another. This question of icons, though, can be very problematic. This is a new icon this is going to be a global icon in Hamburg by Herzog de Meuron, who built the Olympic Stadium in Beijing. And this is the Philharmonic here, and this is 13 stories of apartments. This has gone 10 times over budget, just so you know, 10 times. Now, that often happens with mega projects. You build a mega project, it is completely unsustainable and will not be sustained. And although this woman will be playing here, this actually financially simply doesn't work. It is an icon. So the question I ask you, do you want to do lots of small things well, or one major icon? You can be very creative using old things. This is an old swimming pool in Lille, where someone said, I need a museum, and reinvented the museum by saying, I'll put the museum in the swimming pool. Then, again, old, new, they cover this up often, have shows on the water, fashion shows, for example, on the water. So again, there's so many ways of just rethinking how a library, a museum, etc., could work. Back to Zurich, Renaissance versus Resistance. Next door, the business school opens, yes. Next to the brewery, the Lion Brewery, which of course is an arts place where all the big art galleries of Zurich conglomerate. Next to the high-tech area, and against this type of old-fashioned thinking. So the combination of new tech, art is being created. So again, it's not easy, it's sometimes problematic. Now what I find quite interesting about Beijing the other day, that you have 798, but you have to call it Originality Square. So this is a square where you will be original. You won't be original there, but there. No, I'm exaggerating, of course. But you get the general idea. And then you have next to that something that says unique. Just because you say it's unique doesn't mean it isn't unique. Just giving it the name. But anyway, you know about that art zone. So there are lots of examples of this. But the key question is incubation. And I'm showing you another very famous incubation centre where artistic vitality and other things are coming up in the Philips factory in Eindhoven in the Netherlands again. And you can see the atmosphere of this place is completely different than the things I've seen here. 1 company, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. 14 companies you can just see in that image. I've seen things a bit like that in Dihua Street, which you will know, in Taipei here, where you've got a very small little incubator up here in that building, 127.